Okay, so let's get started. I know that some people have had top lights and they need to be coffeed up. So if you have not done so yet, please grab a coffee and we'll start going into that 2.2 in the next 30 minutes. Over the next 30 minutes, I know. So the slides are linked from the agenda. So if you want to go over the slides in more detail to have a better view of some of the screenshots, please do so. Just go to the slide where I'm talking, and we've got a link to the presentation of these slides. So I will be presenting the work from the entire group, so I'm talking on behalf of all these people. And the key things that we will be in the first part of the presentation, or in about an hour, we will go over the key entities that you need to be aware of if you want to export to that and have your repository indexed in DataMed. So maybe just before we start, if you are looking at a resource, just think about what would be the landing page or what would be the data set that you would like to basically, what is the source of information that you would go to in your own system to make a mapping into the data. So if you were to remember what you think about the things, these are the kind of entities that we will be talking about. We want to be able to, and again, bear in mind, this is about discovery, finding a data set from DataMed, and then you may go back to the primary source of information to get more information. But the key use case is to surface data set of importance. So we need to know who did the work, when it was done, where it's available, in what form. But there were also covered with location, the geospatial and temporal aspects of a data set or a set of information. And obviously what the data set is about. What are you sharing, how it's relevant to biomedical research and translational research, because this is also something that is high on the roadmap. What we head of is how can this resource be really useful to clinicians in practice. So this is something that is really key. And of course, some information about how the data was produced, not only which data instruments were used, because this, of course, has an impact. You may want to filter on this information, but also more and more, what kind of software and data transformation have been applied. So I'll go here. The first element that we touch upon is, of course, the need for object identification. And this is an important aspect to allow for interoperability of data sets. So we need to understand how things are identified. Here, again, this is trying to implement a lot of the work that has been done under the working group 2 about data identifier recommendation. There is an article that has just been published, and actually you can find it in this bioCADDIE. And basically also reference this identifier for the 21st century, a set of guidelines and practices that ensure proper entity identification and connectivity resolution of elements. So in that, everything can be identified. All the entities in the model have an identifier, actually a different type of identifiers. Obviously, if you are in charge of a resource, you probably be minting identifier for your own records. And this is the meaning of primary identifier that we have here. You need at least one. You may, if you have one, even though again this is not mandatory. The only element that is mandatory in the model is to provide a kind of textual description of the entity. And again, this is for allowing the basic text indexing and search from the DataMed engine. The other elements that we can talk about are alternate identifiers, which in a way will be anything that is a declination of the primary identifier according to another schema. And then related identifiers, we will show you that in a sec. Basically, this is the element that we show for identifier, the primary identifier. So the source here is Unicode. This is an example from the specification of an instance that we have documented in the guidelines. Ideally, you should provide an IRI Here, for the sake of putting this on the screen, I just provided the actual identifier of the results, which start with a T and have a single number. But ideally, this should be a resolvable URI. So this is present in the guidelines. We also, this is the reason why we wanted that identifier for the 21st century article that documents how to properly produce resolvable entities like this. And ideally, they should be found in the DATS document that you are sending to DataNet team for indexing. Here, we are talking about the ultimate identifier. It's got a similar structure. We just need to make sure that we are able to understand that this identifier here refers to the same entity, but the source is different. Here, it's the MDL. In this instance, this is PIR. And again, we can discuss in terms of implementation which scheme, where can we find this information about the shorthands and namespaces that would be necessary to use for proper resolution. Again, this is something that we would probably need engaging with the community more to identify the proper context. And further, the related identifier, these are things that are somehow pathway information or different domain. This is not the same information as the protein itself, but these are segment of information that you would be quite interested in being aware of, and also that allows DataNet to connect to other resources. So that's this kind of aspect of interoperability and connectivity and data discovery that these kind of layers of identifier would have and be able to deliver built into the model. And remember, this is available, this mechanism of identification is available to almost all the entities in the DATS model. So going back to the kind of who, where, when, what, and how, this is starting with identifying who. We need to understand the organization and individuals that have produced a data set. This is the key requirement to allow credit tracking and acknowledgement of the work done. This is also part of the incentive of the model to provide, to incentivize people to deliver data and produce, so we can build systems that will acknowledge, allow referencing of data sets in publication, for instance, or work, on derivative work. We also make sure that that model allows people to connect to the grants they've received as a means to, again, acknowledge the funding agencies that are supporting the work that scientists are doing on a daily basis, and also to gauge and deliver mechanisms to allow impact studies, for instance. And the association between funding and agency or grants is done at two levels: the person, also organizations the person may belong to. And this is connected to the notion of data set through the relation of creators. Again, this is a lot of these relations are inspired by the data side, and this is kind of reused, not reinventing the wheel, but just reusing what is the current practice. Similarly, data sets may or not be associated to a publication. So here we need to have the primary publication directly referencing or identifying the data set. And again, publications may be related to grant information, and this is still to make sure that this mechanism for tracking is available. This is an instance of how things would be represented for publication. Again, here the use of IRI, which is important. In terms of implementation, you may know that it was pointed out this morning. If you have a piece of published work, you doesn't permit identifier or DOI, you don't have to worry about filling in all the attributes of the object. We will probably pull that from the relevant services. However, if the research is not published, then you would leave these elements with blank and provide anything that needs to be done to describe the key elements. This is, again, another aspect of a very, very simple example of the kind of application that we had to do. So, how is it? But basically, here, this is the kind of example where how bibliographic reference will be represented, where we will have the first name and last name. But of course, in some cases, like the other here, we don't have necessarily the ability to distinguish from the source which one is the first name and the last name. So we also have an attribute which is a full name, which would be the concatenation of these two things to enable people to supply that information directly. It's not it's the preferred way, but we need to allow this kind of wiggle room for indexing of the page of the authors. And if you have any question at any moment, please feel free to interrupt. And yes, John.
Did you say you could put in an identifier for a bibliographic reference, for example? Is it obvious as we go forward which kinds of identifiers you can put in from which reference sources?
How about the DOI are the oldest ones? These are the ones that we actually rely on. DOI. Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. That's a good one. I think that the model allows you to identify the version, but if we rely on the private identifier, I guess for an indexing purpose, we would look at the latest version of that identifier. That would be the kind of, again, curation or implementation guidelines recommendation that we would have.
So if the origin of the source doesn't distinguish the version in the identifiers, and that's important, it could be added in identifiers also with extra properties that we have. That you could put the metadata within the identifier section, but it will still depend on what the original repository has.
But this is overall a very important question because we will be confronted with a case. We had a question this morning already. How do we deal with versioning or upgrades or updates? In the case of surveys, we can think of accrual data sets. Well, that will be the first release of the population study over the period 1955, 1962, and then the addition. So depending on the kind of release mechanism that the data is exposed to, we will have to document those different aspects. Yes, I will.
Yeah, so I'm trying to understand the implementation part of that, trying to incorporate the standards like schema.org and other
right.
standards into the data model. For example, like is the RAG terms are the standard terms from the first standard, or is it like the DATS specific?
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. The RAG here, the color coding, the types here is definitely DATS specific in this example. However, all the DATS JSON schema also at the moment related to JSON LD context file, which in this first iteration has been mapped to schema.org. It doesn't mean that it's the best fit. It was more a kind of range finding exercise for us to understand the coverage of schema.org against the DATS object that we had to see how far we could go with it. So at the moment, we will stick with that. It could be mapped to another set of resources independent from schema.org, maybe closer to other ontological frameworks. But it will be kind of interaction with the community to see what really flies and is meaningful for them. Yes, schema.org made sense because we wanted to make sure that the people would be able to possibly index or code their HTML pages with these elements, and we would be aware to check at least if they are compliant with the DATS metadata profile, for instance, when inspecting the form. Again, yeah. Alejandra.
I would just add that anyway, even though this is that, when creating the labels for that, we did take into account the existing models. So it's not out of the blue, but we adopted the labels from even schema.org in some cases, other cases data science, for example, because we wanted to maintain interoperability with other models as well.
So then, is that the thought that maybe there was a mapping between schema.org kind of tags with the DATS tag, so that, like say, if later on the people want to take advantage of the mapping already has already been done by DATS, and
right.
then we can kind of connect to the schema.org.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And as Alejandra presented this morning, it was done really very early. We looked at schema.org from almost from the beginning to see, first because we were aware of their efforts, and also to see how far we could go. And so we looked at the schema.org health and life science extension, and with some of the use cases, we realized that it was so specific to some aspect of clinical studies that it would not necessarily be a fitting mapping for anyone working with animals, for instance. So, the small example was the fact that there is no, the taxonomic information in schema.org is only related to pathogens. So, but this is an ongoing discussion, so we can evolve, and they're very open. So, any other questions before I proceed? No, because I'll go on. This is some kind of very interesting feedback. This is new to schema.org to DATS 2.2, the spatial coverage. We had today, so we were able to, in a way, provide information about the several temporal aspects about the data set when it was produced, who published it, and when this kind of information. What we missed in the initial spec somehow was any information about geospatial coverage. And I think this is a feedback that we had through the interaction with various groups, and it came mostly from starting to work with groups doing metagenomics, for instance, where, of course, the samples are collected all over the place, and this is key information for them. But also working with ICPSR, we had some aspects about discussions about this data has been collected in that area of the United States, and then again, how we can we surface this information more specifically. So the previous version of that had information. We could have coded this information, but it would have been through the kind of very generic extra property element that we had. And we wanted to give a more specific aspect to it, so that would make the mapping more immediate to users. This is a very valid in this case. People really want to overlay different kind of data types based on visual information. So, more specific, these are the attributes to this new object, where we can provide a name to that place, to that location, and location can be attached to all these objects in that. So, to data set, to material, so that we know we've collected the soil metagenomic sample or a sample coming from a hospital building in case of an outbreak of whatever E. coli must be a contamination. It could be also an organization or an activity, so we want to be able to understand when samples are collected or patient recruited where these took place, these events took place. So that's basically it for this new object. Somehow we've been looking at GeoJSON specification for connecting this information in geocoordinates and that. Just because it seems to be widely used, it's also actually recommended by GFOGH for anything related to that information. So again, trying to build on the community agreement or consensus in some domains, it felt kind of natural to reuse what GH or GH was actually selecting in that aspect. Right. I guess so. Yes, for places, yes, we could definitely identify it like that.
And in your citation, person identifier. Or
yes.
So identifiers are present in all the entities.
And in fact, ORCID is one of the recommendations that we have for person or possibly organization. Yes, again, how the data set can be used. This is another object we introduced, a notion of license that can link and can be associated to the data set directly. So this is somehow related to the notion of how can we expose as immediately as possible the condition of use of the data set. This relates to the accessibility and the rule of the game. So it's one thing to find a data set. It's probably essential to the use of the use case of the internet to make sure that we can also provide information about the terms of use. And again, license is an identifiable object. So if we have a URI for Creative Commons, for instance, we can just slot it in and we don't have to provide anything else. We can pull that information from relevant resource. Another aspect of this issue of accessibility is the way we handle the distribution, how the data sets are actually distributed. And this is the work implementing, bringing into the work of work package 7 and 12, I think, led by George and Jared, and on this aspect. So here, the key aspect indeed is to know with more precision the rules of engagement in terms of where can I find the data set, in what format it is, what are the access protocols. So we have the notion of data set distribution that relates to also identifying the data repository, the source, the official endpoint that serves the distribution, the condition of access, which are specified directly, and we need to have at least one for each of the distribution. And then another aspect which is interesting is to know that distribution conforms to data standards. This is addressing the key issue of interoperability. I want to know when I access a clinical trial whether it's available in CIDIS format, for instance. And if it's CIDIS format, is it a XML, or is it DTN, or is it an XML version of it? So this module here, it will show you a couple of examples. It's very good at just defining that in machine-readable format and thinking ahead and reuse. That's the kind of things you may want to have the ability to access from DataNet to collect a number of data sets and their sources, and then pipe that to an analysis workflow. So this is an example taken from the example that we proceed on distribution, and we chose the use of this short-read archive example, which was initially deposited in DDBJ. So we have a data set identified by this identifier. Again, for the sake of simplifying the schema, we didn't use necessarily always the full IRI. We just here use the root identifier from the DDBJ of Japan. The format is SRA XML, which is used by this INDC repository, which brings together three main databases. So the European Nuclear Data Archive, DDBJ, the database of sequence in Japan, and short-read archive here in TBI in the US. So this is an example that we can specify the size of the distribution, which is also probably kind of the key information that we like to have. The condition of access is kind of download, and this is the access URI that you can see here, and we identify the repository name. Just to show you that This is how that looks like if you have more than one distribution. This is the same data set, but you can obtain it from NCBI instead of DBJ. The conditional access are equivalent with our public data set, but the repositories are distinct. So the conditional access, this is working, again, I mentioned that earlier on. These are the key elements that we want to capture so that we understand how the data can be accessed. I will go quickly over that. But basically, we need to have this kind of landing page, method of access, authorization, and authentication requirements. Because these last two things are really critical, especially if we are dealing with clinical data sets. So we want to make sure that we can surface this information, but we also want to make sure that we can serve machine readable information, detailing the protocols and that you have to undergo before accessing the actual data. Any questions? No, okay, I go on. Here, this is probably the kind of most interesting aspect of the model because to the discussion that we had this morning, because we will show you how we start delving into the data set and exposing some more information about it. And the data set has this kind of relation about the data type, so what it is the data about, but also we link to the notion of dimension. And dimension is related to, I'll go back into more detail, but can be related to the material. The material here, we are talking about human patient. It could be a soil sample. It could be a protein. So this is where, in a way to answer Yumi's question this morning, we don't necessarily have to use a study element, but we could just say we have a data set for which we measure a number of variables, and the variables are about these 150 patients or anything like that. So just on the side, I will go into more detail in a few minutes. Actually, I need to introduce the color coding. In fact, yes. So we have this kind of purple element, which is material. The information entities are in greener, and the overall visual research object are indicated in red. So you can have as many dimensions as you wish to describe a particular element. And again, this is initially we use dimension, but we see it as kind of variable. What is the thing that you've been measuring about in your experiment? It can be a BMI, it can be a scoring system on any scale of phenotyping. It could be a confidence indicator about a p-value that you have just detected, but you need to declare it. Or this is the field that you need to, or the element that we'd like that you could use to surface all this information about your data set. I'm not saying that you will provide the actual values associated to each of the individual patient, but it provides you with a kind of list of variables that you've measured in your data set. And again, this is the key use case here is discoverability and connectivity. Going back to the data set, I think the important element here as well is also the link to keyword. The keyword is like the PubMed, it's got for the records, you can have a list of keywords about a publication, and the function would be exactly the same. You could use mesh terms, and that was actually what is done in the current implementation of DataMed. And DataSet can have subparts as well, so you can compose that and use that into a bit more complex motifs. Yes, John. Right.
Form the questions asked and that sort of thing. I got the values for each individual.
Well, yeah, in more details, the dimension elements would allow you to provide the full range of values, but you would not necessarily know which value was given to which patient. It would be just to give you, okay, this is the range that you may expect in data to find in this data set, but not necessarily go beyond that point. Then you would have to go to the primary resource and extract the data set of relevance or the subset of data. But yes, I agree with you. We probably need to document a lot more those aspects so that we can provide the kind of guidance to people facing the use case that you just described. And it's even, I guess it's compounded by the fact that you may also want to consider longitudinal studies where the same variable is measured many times over. And again, we need to possibly look into this into more detail, what is entailed to surface this kind of information. Yeah, Anita?
So I'm also very interested about the material kind of component of this. Can you speak a little bit more to, I mean, is this going to be strictly for patient clinical studies, or are
Absolutely, no, not at all. And this is maybe something that we need to clarify completely. I mean, the notion of material here, it can be soil sample, it can be a protein, can be an epitope, can be a patient, can be animals, can be a vector. So if we are talking about, for instance, if we want to represent the content of a gene repository, for instance, we could just use material. And it has some properties, we can identify the elements, list number of properties about them, and tell this is my data set. I don't have any study attached to that. It's just a collection of material that may be relevant for data science. And again, if we consider the roadmap for DATS, it was about allowing scientists to connect things together. So if I'm running a query on, let's say, therapy, gene therapy and I've got a keyword for a construct, then I would be able to connect with all the different constructs that may be available in any NAGI that use the same kind of backbone.
So then, is there a recommendation currently on the materials to use identifiers in proper ways?
Right. Yes, definitely. And again, we go back to the manuscript that we listed. We did preliminary work with IDB, for instance. So IDB is the immunoepitope database run by Björn Petters and Randy Vita in Biola Institute of Biology. And I've got a very nice resource and started mapping their records into the DATS. And I've got a lot of identifiers, and I've got a lot of annotations as well, which have all been tagged with to an ontological framework. And this is what we would like to do. Ideally, all these things should be uniquely identified and tagged to something that can be built. So we can surface this information, but also connect. So now the next step would be, because there is a lot of antibodies, how can we link this to antibody registry, for instance? That would be the kind of nice application we could do as part of a pipeline of built into the indexing mechanism. But again, we have a lot of things to do, so we have to choose, prioritize things. But these are the key things that are in our minds anyway. So, yeah. So I'm already probably running out of time, right?
Yeah, you are, but I think you have to cover those.
Yeah, so I go quick anyway. So I dig into a bit more into the notion of dimension. So the dimensions are, we follow the data set, so we can list all the elements that have been recorded. So we can have as many dimensions as we need. The dimensions may be, is also, the data may be about some dimension, but we can relate to that, so quite confidence indicator about the data set. And dimensions can be linked to the data type. And of course, we need a set of attributes here, which need to be specified. Human readable name, and also the type. Again, these kind of things can be typed with resolvable URI to a class in a ontology. So I'll go, if you have, so just to go, we can specify the unit, and this is what I was telling you about. We have the range of values that could be specified here. The only thing that we can consider is that if we want to be specific, what should we make? Should we allow all the possible values that have been found for that particular variable in the data set, or just the median value, for instance, for it? Again, these are the kind of things providing anything as an interpretation of an existing data set would be probably too much. We need to stick to what people have supplied and what are ready to supply. Again, this is an ongoing dialogue. We can definitely see what comes to the data, how it's used, and how we can make it more effective. John, yes?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite follow what you said there. Why wouldn't this is just a list of names of the variables, right? Not anything outside of the variable.
No, you can possibly provide values for the variable. So in the dimension, you can identify the element, provided a name, a type, whether it's a continuous or categorical variable. There is a description, a unit if it's a numerical entity, and possibly a range of values or possible values. So that's where we can define. So if it's a categorical variable, you could say, okay, I'm reporting the number of cigarettes smoked for high, low, and kind of elements of, if it's a smoke more than 15 cigarettes a day. And I have a range of categories like that. Yes?
So I can add something more. I call it a key.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can I add more key to the dimension?
Sure. Yes, you could. We always
Extra property.
for all entities.
Okay.
But this would be the kind of last resort. I mean, that's the kind of thing. The reason why I'm saying it's last resort is because it makes it kind of difficult to organize across all the repositories unless we have proper curation. So we allow it. So if you think it's required, just use it. We may, in the interaction we would likely use for creating the pipeline, refine that or maybe identify a need for an extension to the DATS for scattering for specific aspects. So, yeah.
Okay. I have one more question.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not related to this, but I want to know if you have an example which is like a real data show so that people can follow instead of just the data type.
Yes, I think.
Where you can point it.
Yes, we have. There are data. This was work that has been done with George and Jared.
Okay.
So we could show you examples of
Okay.
that. Yes.
Thank you.
And I guess what would be interesting is probably make sure that we have a proper coverage of the different variable types or dimension types that we have in mind, and document how those should be covered.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you. Any more questions from anyone? Okay. Ian?
So it's come up a couple of different ways in relation to dimensions, but I think in my mind one of the questions that's open and we still need to keep open is it part of the DATS model to go and model this in detail when we have many repositories which are metadata repositories, so the NIHCD repository would be one, where it's really the responsibility of those repositories to keep all of the list of values, linking to concepts, etc. And there are many existing models for metadata repositories that capture that. And whether it's sufficient to just say, all we need to do is point to an identifier in those systems that have that information, or should that be being modeled in DATS itself? I'll be honest, my opinion is no, it shouldn't be modeled in DATS. That absolutely need to have the kinds of information we're talking about here, but there are existing solutions to that. I mean, I think there needs to be some discussion about which of those serve the purposes, but I don't think that that's resolved. But adding yet another one into the mix, I'm not sure I can justify.
John, so yeah, just following up on that, I think of
this in a bit of a different context than maybe what you were describing, and I missed the point, but the point of that, if I'm not mistaken, is to be able to represent all these different things that the different repositories do and are primary resources for, and to be able to provide access across those different repositories, which may not do them exactly the same way. So in that sense, it's not exactly the same purpose, right? Anyone feel free to correct anyone.
So if I may comment.
Yeah,
so we do indeed have the possibility of putting identifiers. So if the variables are defined like in a CDE repository, people could directly link to that, and that's it. For me, the answer is findability. So do you want to search on those variables in DataMed? Then this needs to be provided in the metadata. But as we said at the beginning, these properties are there for people, for repositories that have that information and want to provide it to DataMed. Otherwise, they either don't use dimension or use dimension but just the name and the type without the value. So you can go as granular as you want according to what information you want to surface of your data. So for me, yes, and if there are repositories available like metadata registries, we can definitely point to those, and there's no point in us repeating information if it's not going to be used for search.
Yes, I guess this topic will be discussed over the next days. That's really on the agenda. Maybe one more thing about dimension. Maybe you view it as kind of placeholder. We wanted to make sure that at least we had pointers to capture some of the information that we've been asked to capture. We can delegate that to the model that is the consensus at the moment. So there is not a problem at all. Yes, that way.
Yeah, so it may be interesting to talk in the context of the DATS model has been used to map the 66 repository already.
Right.
And then from that perspective, how useful the dimension is in terms of indexing those metadata.
Well, I think at the moment we may not have enough information to give a clear answer to that. I'd say that we need, a lot of the repositories, I think, with the first pass, I think we can pull much richer information. At the same time, it is also incurring costs. So how much the primary resource can spend on pulling out this information or exposing it. I think it's a calibration exercise that we need to undergo to make sure that we have represented and made justice to the primary repository, and then react as well to queries that we are getting on DataMed. And inspecting the query log will also give a very good indication of what should be surfaced as a matter of priority. And yes, Anita.
So do you really have a lot of faith that there will be enough users to actually pull the kind of data that Google is pulling out about users? I mean, isn't it potentially somewhat better just to kind of do a very hands-on with the people who really heavily use each of the repositories? Because, I mean, I've seen a lot of people kind of go back to this and say, well, we'll pull it out of the user statistics, but it's not very huge. You get such a tiny sample of what essentially Facebook, Google get.
Right. No, that's a fair comment. That's definitely a fair comment. Again, this is a prototype. This is 1 year of existence, more or less. We have to give it some time. However, having said that, this is still a dialogue with each of the repositories, and they could share this information, and they will be able to tell us. It goes both ways. These kind of discovery indexes are very good for channeling traffic to the primary resources. We're not meant to here to be competing with them. So it should be really kind of mutual assistance and symbiotic relationship, let's say. The key important, for me, the most important aspect is the fact that if I'm working on let's say metabolomics, and I have no idea about what people may be working in transcriptomics or other domains, and database will be able to surface me data sets that are in the same area I'm interested in with a different dimensions. And this is the kind of aspect that we should emphasize and probably work towards. George, you have any? No? Okay, so I'll proceed. Not to eat too much information. That addresses the question. I think, yes, given earlier on. This is a representation, an example of a dimension, how it should be coded. And here we have, this was the work with Matthew, Jared, and George Alger at CPC on the PSR, where basically we identify the name and the element. It's part of the data set. And here we've got a set of values that are allowed in the data set for that particular variable. We don't have, however, the counts or the, in the data set how many have answered marriage, for instance. We don't have any information. But again, this is something we can revisit how to actually document this element. Okay, I hope that answers some of your questions earlier on, and this is how things could be done. This is, yes, I hope you can see in the back. If not, you can just refer to the presentation, which is available online with Google Drive. This is a kind of a blown-up expansion of the relation between data set and data type. And then digging into this use case, we realize that we need to have a finer grain element of data type and to distinguish between different use cases. So this is not yet available in the DATS model per se. However, this gives you a hint about the kind of vocabulary support that we would need to qualify some of these elements. But related to the content aspects, what is the data set about? What kind of information can I expect to find? Is it spectrum? Is it sequence? Is it a video? Is it image? Also, I need to understand whether the data is the raw data, or is it pre-processed, or is it filtered, or this kind of is being curated to give you an idea of the refinement of the data available in the data set, which is a slightly different layer of what you consider. And then in terms of access, whether it's available embargoed or available with restrictions, we can just quickly give you a feel for what can I get out from this repository. And then if you are working with human data, we need to understand whether it's fully anonymized, and indexing that information as well would be quite important. Okay, so I think I'm done with the core at the moment, and I think you had enough of it already. So the next step will be to work on creating your own DATS, basically based on your own repository and data feeds. And then we could let you work for about an hour or 40 minutes. No, 30 minutes. Susanna is staring at me, so no, it's probably less. So 30 minutes, and then we get back to you and then debrief and see where things have given you hard time. Right. Okay. So who's able to do the exercise somehow, or who has the feed of data that you could basically readily work on? So we've got at least one, because Anita is here, and antibody registry would be one target. I think we had representative of Phoenix as well, which and Griggs. Okay, thank you. And then what was interesting from the list of attendees, I saw that people were from Brick, I think, where it's interesting because we're developing a toolkit, so where people can, anyway, build profiles a module that would contain the core information that would allow people to export that.
Yeah, I can extend on that a little bit. So BRICS is a generic platform that we can deploy in different ways. One of the ways we deployed it recently is for traumatic brain injury. And it's made up of a number of different bricks. One of them is an electronic data capture tool, one of them is a repository, one of them is medicine. They all have different definitions of how we describe a study. They have different definitions of metadata to describe the study or the data. So we wanted to unify that study across, unify that study definition across those different bricks. And in doing that, we looked at the specs that were out there, and essentially we found DATS. And I've also been involved in BBQK and bioCADDIE for a little while. So what we're trying to do is from the version that we're deploying to BRICS in June, we'll have redefined how we define the meta attributes that define our study to be consistent with that. And so that'll be very easy, I think, to move our data right into the data net.
That's great to hear. Okay. Susanna, how do you want to proceed? We break out.
Is there a couple of groups then? Perhaps you can have one, Alejandra can have another. We only have 45 minutes anyway.
Okay.
Less. No, it's 2:30. Sorry, yes, you actually have 35 minutes. Yes, yeah. Yes, after the break.
Okay.
And also, I mean, I don't know if there are more questions.
Well, exactly.
Yeah,
It's true, or we can do a question, absolutely. This is the thing, it's hard to organize it, not knowing who will attend. It's not knowing who they have to attend.
Yeah.
Yes. So the option would be, either then, once Philippe and Alejandra have one and another group to try to do something hands-on, that's 35 minutes, or if people have questions and clarification, then we just do a question answer session. We are flexible. John?
I have,
from the CEDAR perspective, I have some hands-on things I'd be interested in doing, not necessarily strictly with data, but some questions I need to answer to do that. But I also have the direct relationship with your team, of course, so we don't have to do that now. So it's just an example of where we are. Oh, so you want to hear the questions now? Yeah, wonderful. I'm going to whisper to you. I'm trying to think this through, and I think I'm going to blame it on jet lag today, that I just can't quite puzzle through the relationship between our relatively abstract system, not a data system per se, where everybody is, the way many people here are working with. There are a few other people who represent abstract systems like CEDAR, I think, and the DATS model and how it can be applied. So one thing I mentioned to you in the lunch, one way you can imagine applying it is that in CEDAR, when we create a template and we create a question in that template that people are going to fill out their metadata with, that question in the template could be associated with a DATS field. And then the answers are automatically associated, that is, the metadata are automatically associated to that DATS field, if that makes sense to what I just said. But I'm not sure I'm really correctly understanding the intended application of DATS as you all are envisioning it across all these repositories. Can you talk about, when people are annotating their data with DATS or their metadata with DATS that are being submitted, what is it exactly that's happening in that annotation?
So, if I understand correctly, you ask us if when the intervention happens for anything with that. In the context of CEDAR, there are probably two answers. One is you could annotate the form that you produce with DATS elements, so they can be, you would be able to pick up the form. If you use schema log mapping, for instance, that would be, we would have a DATS metadata profile for that. That's something like this morning that could be discovered. The other aspect, and if we talk to you the example, if you take the example that you had about the SRA, the short-read archive export, as you collect the data and you are in the position to convert these data sets to short-read archive, and then put that through the converter that you have, we could rely on the mapping that we have between DATS and short-read archive to allow you to export directly a DATS for that particular data set. So the conversion fires up, right? You fire out the converter that shoots an SRA XML file, but also the corresponding DATS that could be readily indexed into the dataset. Now, is that the real need, or if the dataset eventually ends up in short-read archive anyway, we will get it at some point in dataset. So what would be interesting is to analyze from all the repositories that are working with CDAR, which ones have not been indexed yet into dataset, and then work on those guys so that you would have a value proposition an additional value proposition from CDAR to come to this repository and provide an additional service. We can expose your data very quickly. If you submit through CDAR forms, we have the means to provide a database view readily. I think that's definitely a nice story to tell for two projects in this case.